So I really appreciate it. Thank you all very much for joining. We're going to have a wonderful conversation. We have Annie Nyborg, who is the head of environmental and social impact at Peak Design, and Steve Seiger, who is the co-founder of CNOT, a carbon credit company. We're going to talk a lot about offsets, maybe the history of offsets, where they're at today, where these credits are going, where these credit markets are going. Where I wanted to start the conversation is Annie, in our pre-call, you were kind of telling me an interesting story of how your initial gut approach to sustainability at Peak Design was to reduce everything you can possibly reduce. And so you worked with consultants to go explore at all your factories in the world, at all your processing facilities and warehouses, like how much reduction can you actually get? Because obviously that is what you need to do. And then process sort of in a roundabout way led you to carbon credits. Can you kind of tell that story and what you guys found through that process?
Yeah, absolutely. So I work for Peak Design. We're a consumer product company. So 99% of our emissions come from our scope three. So our supply chain, employee travel, things like that. So back in 2018, we decided to look at what our carbon emissions were. It was our first footprinting exercise. We hired a very good, very expensive consultant to help us figure out what our 2017 emissions were. And it was going to be two phases of work. We got through the first phase and they gave us a number and they said, all right, here's your 2017 footprint plus or minus 20%. Now you have to pay us another big chunk of money for the phase two, and we're going to get you about plus or minus 10% of your footprint. Um, so before we started phase two, we just looked at what carbon offsets would cost if we decided just round up the 20% to make sure our bases were covered and buy high quality verified offsets to cover that. And it actually cost less than, actually doing the second phase of work and getting a closer number by just rounding up, like really going big and covering everything we could do. Um, so we did that and we ended up doing it retroactively since the beginning of the company all the way to present day. And we thought everyone should do this. This should be just table stakes for how a company operates. And so long story short, we ended up actually developing what's now the Change Climate Project, which is an organization that oversees the climate label certification. And that certification initially in the early years was basically a ton for ton certification where you measure your footprint and you offset it with that amount of tons of verified quality offsets. That certification has changed and become more sophisticated and morphed into an internal carbon fee standard right now, where basically you measure your footprint and a price is set for that carbon, and that gives you a budget that you're supposed to send on your reduction activities. And you're supposed to spend it on both direct value chain reductions and also beyond value chain mitigation projects. So when we were looking at that new standard, we wanted to do a deep dive into our supply chain to see, all right, instead of just investing all into carbon offsets, let's see what we can do to really decrease our emissions in our value chain. So again, hired some awesome consultants. They were fantastic. They went on the ground, visited all of our facility, or not all of our, but our primary facilities throughout Asia, many different countries, and really did a deep dive looking at the infrastructure, the regulatory issues, the financing, everything that was available, and what levers we could pull to decrease our emissions in our supply chain. And they came back and we had nothing. There was with a business our size, we're a medium-sized business. There was nothing realistically that we could do putting solar panels on,
Does
power
that
purchasing.
surprise you at all? Because even what you said right before this, that 99% of your emissions are in scope three, my assumption, not knowing anything, is that a CPG company makes stuff and holds stuff in warehouses before sending it out. Maybe the assumption is wrong. So why is it that so much of your emissions are in scope three? And then did it surprise you when you did that work to find that you don't have the levers to reduce those emissions?
Yeah, so a couple things. In terms of the emissions, purchased goods and services in the supply chain or scope three, it's all the energy it takes to mine the aluminum, to smelt the aluminum, to process that. It takes a tremendous amount of heat and electricity to process those materials to make them into the bag or make them into the widget that you're creating. So it's all embedded in that manufacturing process, which is why the vast majority of our emissions is in the supply chain. Um,
And
and
you don't own your factories supplier, like you did the design and maybe the e-commerce stuff, like
right.
suppliers, vendors own your factories.
Yes, contract manufacturing. Yeah, we have contract manufacturers that do it, but we're still responsible for that, business activity and the creation of that. So that falls under our scope or our responsibility, or that's how we're seeing it and how we're measuring it.
Mhm.
Um, and when I say we can't do anything in scope three, that's not true. We can find better materials, and that is what we are doing. So we can use recycled aluminum, recycled nylon, recycled poly, and that's a huge lever. It's really the only significant lever that we can pull to really noticeably reduce our scope three emissions right now. The other levers in terms of solar panels, power purchase agreements, things like that, it's just case by case a slew of issues. One of the primary problems that we had is because we don't own our own factories and we use contract manufacturers, many of these folks don't own their facilities and they don't stay in their facilities forever. And so we could invest quite a bit in building up that infrastructure for that facility, which would still be a good thing, right? I mean, if we were not trying to be a business to, and reducing our own emissions, like it would be a nice altruistic thing to build a solar panel array on any building. But ultimately, we want to take, credit for the emissions reductions that we're investing in. And oftentimes these suppliers will move every couple of years from, one facility to another facility. So we weren't sure, if we wanted to make those kinds of investments. And similarly, depending on the geography you're talking about, power purchase agreements sometimes are a thing, sometimes aren't a thing. And in all of our circumstances, they weren't. So it brought us full circle in a sense that, we're still doing the material transitions into low carbon materials. But we really were ready and excited to invest in supply chain reductions, and we just found we couldn't, or it just didn't make any sense with return on investment. And that's where we kind of circled back and said, actually, the biggest bang for our buck right now, like where we could actually move the needle the most, given our particular circumstance, is in really high quality carbon offsets. So
Yeah.
we're kind of coming back to really understanding the value and importance of those, especially being a consumer product brand.
So I want to one more question for you, and then we'll come transition to Steve a little bit. But what was it like in 2018 buying offsets? Like, paint the picture of what that. I mean, that 2018 was probably before most of us were in this industry. So what was it like? What was the process? You called them high quality and verified. How did you know what existed to prove that? What was
Yeah.
Steve's going to do the next step of like where do we go over the last 8 years? But what was it in 2018?
Yeah, I mean, we have a unique circumstance in that we were functioning through 1% for the Planet. We're 1% for the Planet brand, which means 1% of our revenue goes to environmental nonprofits. So we specifically wanted to work with um, offset brokers who qualified for 1% for the planet. So primarily we used an organization called, and we continue to use an organization called the Bonneville Environmental Foundation. Um, and we put our faith in them and in their due diligence. And so we didn't take it upon ourselves to try to research these things. And I think you should do your homework in terms of who your partners are. But we also got, I think, the unsexy carbon offset of landfill gas, which is not really exciting in terms of, forest co-benefits of like, forestry and things like that. But we could measure it pretty solidly. We knew putting that thing on, flaring methane, we had really good metrics for what was actually happening. So, yeah, we kind of kept it simple, used a
You just
partner.
found a partner who had good answers to good questions, and you put some trust in it and
Exactly.
say, "Hey, we need this many credits. Can you find them for us?" That evolved quite a bit. I mean, over the last certainly starting in 2020 ish, picking up. I think Steve, correct me here, but CNOT was founded in 2021 and 2022 among a cohort of companies that said we're going to bring marketplace like transparency to carbon offsets. You'll be able to go online, look through what you want, see the price, see where it came from, get a bunch of data. and do it that way. When you guys started CNOT, what was the state of the carbon markets? Now, 3 or 4 years beyond when Annie was first buying them, and then how did that transparency mission that many startups came trying to offer? How did that develop over the last 4 years?
Yeah, it's a good set of questions. And first of all, thanks again for having us. We're excited to be here. So we started CNOT in 2022 because, well, as a backdrop, like my co-founders, Mark, Dan, and I, we're all sort of like tech marketplace people, where we spent a lot of our careers thinking about how to build a marketplace that works for buyer and seller and sort of like creates the efficient, high transparency, low friction transactions you're looking for. I was previously at a company called Thumbtack as the general counsel. It's like a marketplace for local services. I spent some time at Uber. Mark and Dan helped co-found Rev, which is like a speech and translation transcription marketplace that helped you find like a translator or someone to help you with like your court transcription and things like that. So like I've thought a lot about marketplace problems. And as we sort of looked at climate opportunities, sort of saw carbon markets as like nothing but a deeply broken marketplace. So the experience that Annie had in 2018 was pretty typical for the time. And there's like a lot of sort of like almost think about like your 1970s stockbroker, where like you're in a smoke-filled room, people are wearing lots of like tan, I guess. But you're calling people and you're saying like, what do you got? What's the price? And like the answer is very much like one-to-one sort of over-the-counter transactions where it's very difficult to understand what to buy, how much to pay for it, and where to access it. There are something like 20,000 carbon credit projects out there. There's something like 40 registries and hundreds of methodologies. And the actual buying process, there's no single marketplace. You don't go to Charles Schwab or E-Trade and get access to all of them. It's all done over the counter. The other thing that I think is important to note and sort of became very clear during the period when Annie started buying, as the market grew a bit into like 2022 and 2023, is that the market has real challenges on integrity as well. There are a handful of companies that now are essentially ratings agencies. They're trying to be like S&P or Moody's, but for carbon credits. Among them are Solvera, BeZero, and Calyx Global. And they've looked at this stuff. Calyx Global has a distribution on their website. Totally encourage you to go check it out. It's on their blog. But it's a distribution of their ratings over time on like a highly likely to be delivering the ton of carbon you're trying to buy and very low likelihood to be delivering the ton of carbon you want to buy. And the distribution is way to the right. If you picked a carbon credit out of the hat, you would very likely get one that is kind of greenwashing, or at least not intentionally necessarily, but like problematic.
Well, can me ask about that? Is it? I've read stories where it is intentionally greenwashing, meaning there are many smart businessmen out there who go, "Oh, some suckers are going to pay us some money to plant some trees in a forest that nobody owns in a place where no one's going to go visit. Sure, here's a nice website. We'll take the money and we'll run." And some of those people went to jail, and some of those people got in a lot of trouble. And that is not the majority, but that is a very loud and attention-seeking minority. That is what bad looks like when it is intentional. What does bad look like when it is unintentional? When it is, it seemed like we were all doing a nice thing, but I guess we're not.
Yeah. Well, let me take this apart one by one. I'm a lawyer, so I think in like bullet points. So like bullet point one is like there are bad actors in this market. There are people who've gone to jail. There's been outright fraud. I do think that's a significant, like a very small minority of the market who are doing things intentionally. Either like a buyer who's like, I'm going to buy the cheapest stuff that I know is garbage. I don't actually care about the climate. I just want the checkbox. Or like a seller who's like, I know this is all fake. I'm just here to make a quick buck. I think that exists, but it's small. On the other side, like the reason we keep coming back to needing carbon credits as an important tool in this in the sustainability journey is exactly what Annie said. Like she described Peak Design's experience, but I actually think it's not at all unique. A lot of companies find a lot of their emissions in scope 3 and a place where they have very little control. Think like a professional services business, like a law firm or an architecture firm. Like the vast majority of their emissions come from employee commute, offices that they don't own, business travel, and upstream goods and services that they just sort of buy from a vendor. They have basically zero levers to pull. other than carbon credits. And there's huge swaths of the economy that are actually quite hard to decarbonize is the other piece of this. Like business travel, I'm so glad to see the investment happening in sustainable aviation fuel, but it's very far from like being at scale and prime time. And so like business travel, the only game in town right now is carbon credits. Sort of to take that to like the modern time, right? Like everything AI, same thing, right? Like we use Claude Code, we use Codex, we use Anthropic, we use Cowork, whatever, like all that stuff you're doing is filtering through to some data center somewhere where someone is burning natural gas in a lot of cases to power these data centers. Like you don't control the data centers, you don't control which one it gets routed to. You're using this tool. In a lot of cases, it's very even hard to measure it. Like we can get into that in a second. But like the only way to mitigate it somewhere along that chain is to take steps elsewhere in the world with projects that are doing good. To get the core of your question though, which is like, how do we get projects that are not doing the right amount of good, even though they
maybe right
were
before that,
well
can you
intentioned? Yeah,
define how the rating agencies teach us a little bit? What does it mean to be a good project? What does it mean to be a not good project?
Yeah, that's great question. So here's how we think about the world, and I think this is pretty well accepted. As a first principle, like we take a first do no harm approach. So the project should absolutely not be actively doing bad in the world. That surprisingly happens sometimes, especially in forestry projects where the land the project is happening on is actually contested. Like land ownership in a lot of parts of the world is fuzzier than it is in, say, the United States. And as a result, like if you don't bring along local communities, you often can have someone top down claiming ownership of the land and taking all the profits from the project while not treating the local community well. That's a version of this. So we avoid projects where that's an issue. Like you don't want to be doing active harm with your project. In terms of like carbon integrity, there are sort of four key concepts, and I'll cover them in sort of decreasing significance. The most important is what's called additionality. And it's not totally intuitive, but it is super important. And the basic idea is that you need to be able to show that the carbon project at issue would not have happened but for the money coming from carbon credits. It was not a thing that was economically viable without carbon credits. It's not a thing that was required by regulation. What it means is that there's lots of stuff that is actually quite good for the climate that may not make a good carbon credit anymore. To give you like a concrete example, like large scale wind and solar in North America, great for the climate. Like bring it on, more solar, more wind, notwithstanding like current politics, like those are good for the climate. They no longer make good carbon credits. And that's because those projects pencil on their own. There are like for-profit investors who want to invest in those projects to make a buck. The cost curves have come down, like they pencil, therefore not a good carbon credit. A landfill gas project, by contrast, in the developing world, is a great carbon project, typically, because in a lot of cases, because there's really no incentive to like build the cap system to collect the methane, flare it, and perhaps generate electricity out of it. You can sell the electricity, but it usually doesn't make enough money to pay for itself. And so you need that extra subsidy. So that's additionality. A second issue is what's called over-crediting. This is the question of like, is the project issuing the right number of credits? This comes up a lot in forestry-based projects in particular, where you're looking at like what would have happened without the project. You're protecting this forest. If you assume the whole thing was going to get clear cut in 1 year, you're probably going to issue too many credits because that's an unreasonable assumption. You should have like an accurate assumption and model of what would have happened but for the project. And this is a place where a lot of like well-intentioned folks have gone wrong in the past and is getting better over time. But like there's a Guardian article that flagged some of this without casting like intentionality here. Like the basic idea was that the registries on which these projects were listed had methodologies. Those methodologies were, I would say, flexible about the assumptions you could make. And a lot of these projects assumed like much more deforestation than was probably warranted, given like analysis over time of like surrounding areas. So it's like we assumed this whole thing was going to be clear cut. We issued credits representing the difference between a clear cut and fully preserving the forest, but maybe it was only at risk of like 10% deforestation. So you should have issued way more credits, and therefore each credit was devalued. Another concept is what's called permanence or durability. This is like how long is the carbon out of the atmosphere? Some projects, again, landfill gas, you destroy methane, you burn it, it's gone forever. So it's 100% permanent. Nature-based projects store the carbon somewhat temporarily in the trees. Trees can burn down in a forest fire. They can be subject to infestation. There could be like land use changes. You could deforest them, and so you have to deal with like projected permanence. And the last issue that is pretty well handled for the most part is double counting. The idea that like only one person should take credit for each credit along the way. So hopefully there's a little bit of flavor there of like how you can sort of go down a bad path here, both as a buyer and actually as a project developer as well. I do think the market's made great strides in the last 3 or 4 years. I'm happy to talk about that too.
Yeah. Really quick, just so everyone knows, the Q&A is open, chat is open, so you can drop in any questions that you have. Annie, Steve just went through some technicality of the market. Your first time buying this stuff in 2018, you were like, I don't know, that's a nonprofit. They seem nice. Hopefully they do a good job. Now that all this stuff is out there and there's more to read, and smart people like Steve, who is self-described to me as a very handsome entrepreneur. So he called himself on a prep call. Just so everybody knows.
This is flat under my wife.
But now that you got this
although,
stud carbon credit dealer here, but like what is how much are you trying to understand this stuff as a buyer, or are you still saying I am resorting to trust? Now I trust maybe a new vendor, or I have more reasons to trust. Like, how much do you want to understand everything and deeply understand this stuff? And then the follow up there is like, you're buying this to tell your customers we're an outdoors brand. You, dear customer, cares about the outdoors. We also care about the outdoors, and here's one way in which we care about the outdoors. How much do you then translate everything that Steve just said to the customer? How much does the customer care about all these things?
Yes. So multi-part question.
It's a bad habit of mine. I'll get
No,
better.
that's cool. Just gonna keep it all going in there. So we bought and continue to buy from Bonneville. I will say we bought from another vendor. I don't even know if they're in business. I won't say their name. And I'm pretty sure we bought crappy forestry projects that had all the issues that the Guardian article came out with. Because again, I was like, they're 1%. They seem good, and there's trees, and I'm pretty sure they were terrible. So we have not executed perfectly, nor do we plan to continue executing perfectly in terms of our carbon purchases. I wish I could say I geek out about this and I go deep into all of this stuff and want to understand this, but I don't have time to do any of that. I'm a team of one that's running a sustainability program. And so it's been leaning on the right partners. And I do think one reason we're, bringing CNOT on board is because of their level of rigor in not only the level of rigor in terms of assessing these through the different rating agencies and understanding what exactly is happening, but also the diversification of the portfolio to make sure that we have a mix, just like you would in, a stock, fund or whatever. So, I haven't gotten any better at deep diving myself, I would say. I mean, I study this kind of an armchair, expert or whatever, but I really leave it to the experts and we outsource that. And we do that by finding right now, I think, a partner who really goes deep into that. Second part of the question in terms of how we communicate that with our customers. Historically, we haven't. Historically, we have done it really just as a table stakes business practice that we think is the right thing to do. I think we're definitely, an anomaly in that because I think most people need to be able to share it with their customers to make it the point to leadership that it's a worthwhile investment. I think we're going to change that. I think we are going to start talking about this more, not just just demonstrating that we're doing our part in terms of the climate crisis. But I really do want to get on my soapbox about how important these projects are. And they aren't different necessarily than just other climate investments that we're making. And yet they've been kind of unjustly maligned in terms of, oh, it's an offset, that's bad. But a carbon investment in this project that might or might not do something, that's good. I want to demonstrate that these are different kinds of projects, and oftentimes offsets have like robust methodologies behind them to show what they're trying to achieve. And it's another type of investment that you're making to, combat the climate crisis. So I've, made it a point that it's something that I want to talk about more and help educate our consumers on what these actually are, and they're not some terrible tool to use, in combating the climate crisis.
Yeah. If you were to, it's really interesting and surprising, maybe in a wonderful way, which you don't get so much anymore. Like, you just did this stuff for many years without talking about it. Were there ever times, maybe in a business downturn, maybe whatever, where that decision was put under pressure? The decision to either keep buying offsets or to keep buying them in secret?
You know what? It hasn't, I think, until recently. I think the economic headwinds right now that we're confronting in terms of, tariffs and the Iran war and the supply pressures that that's creating has has tightened things up for peak design. We still, as far as I know from leadership, we still aren't questioning our investment in these things and what we're doing. It's something that we really, as a company, have been kind of hanging our hat on for a long time. And so I think, we won't be changing anytime soon. And I think, I don't know, but I do feel like there's, different levels of regulatory requirements and just to do business now with different chains and different brands, like you have to demonstrate that you're doing something around climate. And this is a nice, neat way to demonstrate that.
Yeah, it's a
If I
real one.
may just jump in with a couple of quick thoughts. One is like it doesn't have to be wildly expensive. Donna Lee from KLX just wrote like a really neat piece in Trellis a couple weeks ago, I think, that carbon credits can range from literally less than $1 per ton to over $1,000 per ton. I have a slide deck somewhere that like has those two side by side, and it's hilarious because people are like, these are nominally the same thing, but that's ridiculous. And the worst part about it is that $1,000 one isn't necessarily the best credit out there. And the 50 cent one probably is a pretty bad credit, but like a $3 or $4 or $5 one may not be. And so you don't actually have to spend that much money to do this well. And like just like our take is that like of course budget is an impact. Everyone doing this is running a business. So an input, I should say. And so of course they're gonna account for their budget along the way. But it's super important. I should say like there are other like increasingly strong resources out there that you can look to as you try and do these things. One is there's a thing called the Offset Guide written by the folks at the Stockholm Environment Institute and the Greenhouse Gas Management Institute, I believe. It's a free resource. You Google it, you find it. And there's like a 5-page section of it called like how to avoid low quality credits. And it basically has a hierarchy, and it's like pick based on just registry, pick based on pictures, pick based on price, all bad. The high integrity ways are look at third party ratings and do deep project level diligence. And so like we did not make up our approach. We're trying to implement best practices for other people, which is essentially like we do our own project level diligence, we write it up transparently and share our take. We also hold ourselves accountable by requiring a third party rating of like triple B or above, essentially like high on their scale, so that you don't have to say like, why do we trust CNOT alone? Like here's someone else agreeing with them. And I think there's like that is a straightforward way to buy that I think sort of is trust enabling in a market where like it's not super even across the board.
Mhm.
Yeah. Ed asked a question here, so I'll read it and then maybe add some more color. But Ed asks, can you share your views on where we collectively are with macro discussions like carbon tax versus price carbon credit markets, or industry by industry, or company by company carbon prices? And do you see any company specific takes on those macro discussions affecting how companies approach carbon pricing or carbon offsets? I'll latch onto that a little bit and say one of the things we talked about before, but is always in my mind is there's a kind of the big part of this is marketing. Like the value you get is you tell your customers, whether they be retailers or consumers, and remember else that here's another example of something that we do that's good. Marketing budgets go up and down with economic times. But if we think offsets are an important thing for our economy and our planet, then maybe regulations need to be a part of that. But what is the balance uh, between regulatory carbon taxes, offset regulations, and this like personal or company by company approach to credits? Maybe starting with Steve.
Sure. Yeah. We're in North America. Obviously, like different parts of the world are different. The EU is, I think, more forward leading on the regulatory side. But I would say in North America, effectively, like the regulatory approach is a zero. Like it's not like a 1 or 2 out of 100. It's like a zero right now. Like there isn't anything. I'm not saying that's what I want. It isn't. But I don't see like great hope in the immediate term for that path. There was much more hope in like the aughts, I would say, that sort of fizzled and has only gone down since then. It could bounce back. I hope it will bounce back, but I don't think it's going to bounce back in the next 2 years or 4 years. And I think the corollary there, though, is that like the private market has actually accelerated things. Like one of the deeply unspoken, like my pet theory of the world, which is not a CNOT theory, is that like it's the insurance companies who are going to save us because they're insuring these assets all around the world. And they don't like the fact that there are floods and fires and so forth occurring. And so therefore they're going to make their and I know this is Adriel, this is your core business, but like make folks take account of where they're building and doing things, and then also start to reduce their emissions so that like the impacts are less. And I think we will start to see that stuff. Similarly, I think like uh, the number of constituents who are asking about this stuff is growing. That like we typically see our customers are doing this because of direct asks from like their customers, their employees, their investors, or maybe regulators, but less frequently that. And I think that remains potent. I think I saw a survey the other day that something like 20% of all people and something like 30+% of people under 34 like are concerned about using AI because of the environmental impact. Like those kinds of inputs from customers are what I think will drive or could drive
And does
increasingly customers
offsets,
to
I
do this
mean,
stuff.
just to like push on that point a little bit, totally. Well,
Yeah.
a year ago, the concern was water use of AI. Today, it's general energy use of AI.
Yep.
Absolutely, most ages are concerned about those resource uses. I feel like if you went to those same people and said, "Don't worry about it, we have offsets," that doesn't solve every problem. Like they're going to be pushed back around. You're
No,
back to
of course not.
greenwashing. You're back to like just figure out how to build more renewables or figure out how to use less water. Like if I hear
Yeah.
about offsets are here to counteract those problems, if I the metaphorical,
Yeah.
I
I
hear about
think
that, I'm going to lose some trust.
yeah. Couldn't agree more. Like I don't en I mean I envy the AI companies from their growth rates. I don't envy them for their public policy challenges. Like
Yeah.
if you're OpenAI or Anthropic, you're getting yelled at for any number of things. Most potently, like you're stealing all of our jobs, you're taking all the water, you're driving up the price of electricity, you're harming national security, like cybersecurity risk. Like the list is long. Um, I would argue two things. One is that climate is on that list. It's probably not number one, but it is on that list. And there's like two places it comes up. One is like construction of data centers is wildly emissive, and people forget about like the steel and the concrete that goes into that, as well as like the embodied carbon of chips and things like that. And then operating the data centers, you see like XAI, now SpaceX's data centers in Memphis that are running like on-site gas turbines that may or may not be permitted under the EPA, but are definitely emitting a lot of carbon. Like those are real problems. And I would say like the climate problem is one of the more tractable. Like the jobs and AI question, like that's a really hard question, and I don't actually have a good answer to it. And I don't think there may not be a good answer to that, other than like training and like AGI is thrown out there, like not AGI, excuse me, like universal basic income is thrown out there, but like carbon is actually one that is resolvable. It doesn't get you out of jail for all the other things you're doing and that you need to talk to people about, but like it also like we should address the problems we can address, and I do think like carbon is one of them, and we should go after it.
Yeah. Annie, how do you look at? I know you guys are a mid-sized business, so a lot of regulation does not impact you. But maybe let me ask the question this way. You said for a long time you haven't told the story of offsets to your customers. You maybe are beginning to do that soon, partially to get some business value out of it, partially for whatever other reasons. Let's say tomorrow you left and you were at a larger company and the
Mhm.
larger company hadn't bought credits before. They've been measuring emissions. Uh, they've done that for a little bit. They just haven't bought these credits. You at Peak Design have supportive leadership who's like, yeah, cool, outdoor stuff, we're in, let's put the money in. You go to this new retailer, you don't necessarily have that same level of leadership. Are you fighting for offset purchases early on in your tenure there? How are you making the case for offsets? And what would need to be true for you to fight that uphill battle at a new employer?
That's tricky because I do think it's kind of a dependent on, yeah, the type of company, the type of business.
You
Because,
could say in the retail and clothing world that you know.
I think first step is I would see if there were any easy wins in the actual reduction because that's money saved as well. I think to some degrees, just efficiencies like in the supply chain and I think but then yes, I think early on I would be. And again, as Steve pointed out, the offset game can be pretty inexpensive. We were buying pretty great offsets for $4 or $5 a piece when we were doing a ton for ton. And this kind of connects back with, sorry, maybe I'm taking this question in kind of in a weird direction, I think. But talking about the challenges of, you having, your qualms about if a data center is like, but we're buying offsets, everything's cool. And that is an issue, right? And so I think that was one reason the climate label, I think one of many reasons, switched to an internal carbon fee, which would be great regulatory wise as well, as opposed to just voluntarily. But it is an internal carbon tax, basically, that the climate label now pushes out there, which makes it a lot easier because now it's just like, here's your emissions. This is how much money you have to give somewhere in some way, and you can be very transparent about how that money went out the door and what it went to. So there's less about, oh, you're greenwashing because you're saying you're buying these offsets, but I'm not actually doing anything. It's like, no, I committed to spending $300,000 on this, and this is how I spent $300,000. It's out the door. So, this is not getting back to your question of like what I would do in terms of, mobilizing leadership. But I think I would. I mean, I think, if I went to a big firm, I would start pushing an internal carbon fee and being smart about how we decrease our actual emissions so that that fee hopefully goes down to
And what are the
ultimately.
mechanics of an internal carbon tax or internal carbon fee? Is it, hey, whatever our emissions are, real money goes into a pot that I am allowed to spend? Is it hypothetically this would be our taxes? So let's all hypothetical. Like, what is the, walk me through the actual
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think
process.
depending on the framework and the model and certification you use, I think it probably looks different. Stephen, I'm sure, can say a lot more about this than I can. We go again by the standard of the climate label. And currently, the climate label per metric ton is $15. And that'll go up every year, basically. So next year it'll probably be 16, the next year it'll be $17, and so on. And yes, that actually translates to an actual money budget that we need to prove that we have spent either on offsets with a set of criteria to ensure that they are high quality offsets, or in better materials, or in, renewable energy procurement in our supply chain. And that organization looks at all of that and verifies that as a third party auditor. So yes, it's actual money going out the door towards climate solutions. And that's, changed our mix of offsets now because instead of, well, I won't bore you with that. Because we're 1% for the planet, we wanted to minimize how much we were spending on offsets so that we had more money to donate to others.
Okay.
But now, because we just have a certain amount we have to, spend on climate, we're now having a mix of higher cost offsets because we just have to make sure we spend that money.
And in exchange, you get like the climate label that you could put on a backpack or on your website
Exactly.
or whatever.
Which again is like, I think climate is such a hard thing to communicate and to market, and offsets even more so. To try to get that through in a pithy way for consumers to understand is just really challenging. And so the label was developed to try to make it be like certified organic, fair trade, climate label. So people can look at that label and say, okay, I don't really know
There
what
has
that
been some
means.
success. I mean, on Amazon, their
Climate pledge, yeah.
climate
Or
pledge. Thank
climate
you. The
pledge
climate pledge,
friendly.
whatever that is. Like, the fact that they named a stadium the Climate Pledge Arena is a huge deal for all the negative stuff you might throw at Amazon. That is, you might say they're greenwashing their hearts out, but I'd rather them do that than nothing. And then second
Right.
of all, the fact that there is climate pledge friendly labeling on Amazon or on products on Amazon, I think makes some difference. Like, it catches my eye and I click that
It
button
does
and
make a
that's
difference.
50 cents
It's been
more. Like,
frustrating because we haven't, climate label has not been able to qualify for that. Well, I can go into that because we qualify the entire brand. Like to become a climate label, a
that's
hundred
supposed to be,
percent of your emissions have to be accounted for. For climate pledge friendly, it's just at the product level. And so technically all the products of a brand whose climate label is product level certified, but they won't count that still because it's not a
Yeah.
product level certification. But anyway, yeah,
I,
it's
I
still
think
good.
there's like two pieces here that are super important, like to pull out. One is like the core question you were asking, Adriel, I think is like, what is the business case for doing this? And I think that is the key starting point for anyone who's considering using carbon credits, probably anyone doing anything on climate in general. Like there are probably some businesses out there, absent like an idiosyncratic owner, like if you're selling to oil and gas companies or something like that, like you probably have a tougher business case to make. If you're selling to like an outdoor brand to sort of like left-leaning outdoor minded folks, you have an easier business case to make. But like in each case, there probably is a business case to make, and it probably doesn't exist for everyone. But like we see that as a core thing we help with because like that's the whole point is like this, you're a for-profit business, you're doing this for a mixed set of reasons. Yes, you want to do it well and do good, but you also are a business and they like need to tell the story. And similarly, like the storytelling piece is a key piece of the puzzle as well, right? Like the how do you make like a landfill gas project, which is kind of like gritty and boring in some respects, like actually interesting. And like, how do you tell the story of like, what is it actually doing and why is it good? And how does it help with air quality in the region? It actually provides jobs. Like one of my favorite projects in the world is this project called Titus, which is like a natural gas pipeline repair project in Bangladesh. Like Bangladesh is one of the is classified as the least developed country that has aging natural gas infrastructure. That natural gas infrastructure, for lack of a better way to put it, like leaks. Natural gas leaking is really bad. It causes explosions. Also causes like limited natural gas pressure to homes. It also like is a huge climate issue because natural gas is methane. We can subsidize with carbon credits, and that's what this project does. Like typical like industry standard technology from the US or that you would find in the US or in Canada or wherever, and bring it to Bangladesh, monitor those pipelines, repair them, reduce the methane, and also have tremendous community benefits. Because if there's no gas pressure in the pipelines, that means the people who are trying to cook on natural gas don't have natural gas come to their house. That tends to be like vastly predominantly women who are then forced to do like unpaid labor and search for wood as an alternative fuel source for hours a day. So like totally kind of like off the beaten path project I wouldn't have thought of before I got into the space, doing like natural gas pipeline repairs, but super high carbon integrity, highly rated by like multiple third parties, labeled by the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market. Great community benefits as well. Like that's a story like I love to be able to tell, and it's different from like here's pretty trees, which there are great nature-based projects as well, but like going a layer deeper and telling those stories is like a really important piece of the puzzle. It's something we, obviously
Yeah.
think our customers care about.
You guys have both kind of separately alluded to or talked about the mistakes in this industry, and Annie, I think you've said basically we made mistakes then, we're still making mistakes now, and we're not expecting perfection of ourselves, but we are expecting progress.
Yep.
Can you, Annie, you've been doing this for 7 or 8 years, Steve for 4 or 5. Can you talk a little bit about if you're fast forwarding that same amount of time, looking back on 2026, what mistakes you could be making right now, and what you think progress looks like for you over the next couple of years? Maybe Annie and then Steve.
We're making no mistakes. We're absolutely perfect. Everything's great. We've got CNOT on board. There's no
Same,
mistakes.
same, same, same.
Whatever mistakes we're making, you're making. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, maybe I should defer to Steven because
Defer to Steve. Yeah.
he's the guy I'm
exactly.
hiring not to make mistakes. No, I mean,
That's a good
inevitably
point.
we're making mistakes. Inevitably, there are going to be projects that
Yeah.
aren't panning out the way. But that's another thing CNET offers is that the fact that if it doesn't work out, they will swap in something that does work out. And so that's another reason that we've been partnering with them to basically kind of buffer, limit the risk potential. Yeah, I don't know, Steven. What do you? I probably have
I
much
guess
more
Steve
eloquent
probably thinks
opinions
more
about
meta
this.
about this stuff than you do, more or less.
Yeah.
maybe. Two thoughts. One is there's no such thing as a perfect carbon credit, and there never has been. And I think like where the industry got in trouble a few years ago was like, like we're carbon neutral because we bought carbon credits, and like period, full stop, like no second sentence, no explanation, no limitations, etc. I think the challenge of the market is like you cannot get to perfect, you can get to substantially de-risked. And substantially de-risked should be the goal, and ideally like more and more de-risked over time. I think the corollary of that, which I think is the mistake that all of us are making, not just in carbon credits, but in sustainability more generally, is the risk of like letting perfect be the enemy of the good. Like Annie's example about like whether to spend another year and lots of money on getting to like the last 20% or actually start doing something is like exactly it. The amount of like effort to get to like accounting level precision about carbon accounting, et cetera, is like a thing that and like emphasizing reporting over action, I think is like endemic to the space. And I do think like uh, if you don't know exactly what your emissions are, but can get started somewhere, like you should do that. And that's the most important thing. So like make the mistakes. I love how Annie owns their mistakes. So like we did it, we made mistakes, we're gonna keep making mistakes. Like that is like my favorite message because I think doing is the important part. And I should say like I'm on the AI hobby horse because of course we are. It's like we're in Silicon Valley and the AI is the thing. But it's like that is a space where everyone is gnashing teeth right now, being like, there's lots of emissions here. We don't really know how to measure them. What do we do about it? How do we figure this out? Like, I don't actually know all of the answers. I am confident though that like that industry is going super fast and like thinking about it for longer and like taking our time is the wrong path. So like we need to figure out how to like accelerate and lean in and like do make mistakes, but make the mistakes like full speed ahead, own the mistakes, fix them for next time kind of thing.
Amen. What he said. Yes. Agreed. Double click on that. I love that.
You want to, Steve, since you brought up AI, do you want to talk a little bit? I think you guys just released a product that folks can use if you want to understand their AI emissions.
Sure. So biggest challenge of AI in the emission space, apart from the fact that we like know it is very emissive. It's like we know a few things. We know like it's growing like absurdly fast, faster than any product in history. I think Anthropic grew 80x in Q1, which is amazing, especially off of like a massive base. So like they're just an exemplar, like it's fast. Um, Two is like there's very limited data on kind of anything about emissions, right? Like if you think about what happens is like our engineering team writes a product on Cloud Code, pushes the code, like that goes through Anthropic, that goes through their cloud server, which may be on Amazon or now maybe on SpaceX or some combination, and you don't really have a lot of control over it. And like what gets reported back to you usage wise is like very little. Sometimes you have like a token number, but not all tokens are created equal. Not all tokens are created equal across each model. Like there's a bunch of layers that can meaningfully impact your emissions. But like at some basic level, there's like electricity being generated somewhere to power some stuff that's helping you do a thing. And that electricity can be from like solar or wind, which is great and pretty clean, obviously, or it can be from natural gas or coal, which is less so. And so like the challenge before us is to figure out as fast as possible, like what are those emissions and how much are they growing? We actually released a blog post yesterday that I had a lot of fun working on because it was basically saying like, all right, let's take a small chunk of this. Let's take AI coding tools alone, like Cloud Code or Codex from OpenAI, and like try and extrapolate using public data, which is limited to like, what is the scale of emissions right now? And what is that going to look like in 1 year given growth rates? And we landed on like 250,000 tons a year, but growing 25x year over year. So like by a year from now, it'll be like roughly the size of the state of Vermont. And then like another year after that at the same growth rate, like exponentially bigger. I'm not sure we got it right. I'm not sure we got it perfect. I think like we almost certainly missed it. Like please check. We like tried to share everything we used. We're using best available models, but like we need more of that of people like roughly estimating what it is, and then like hopefully we can jump off of that to like, okay, what should we do about it? There's a great session happening at Trellis Impact in San Francisco next month. That's like a whole thing about like how to decarbonize data centers. Somebody, Elemental Impact, I think, led a whole thing yesterday about investing in next generation data center technologies. All of those things are great. They're going to take some period to percolate through, and so my hope is that like there are tools available to like hopefully use offsets or something like it to or RECs or similar to like mitigate ongoing emissions now as we like seek to decarbonize the infrastructure over time. And that all starts with like being more transparent, being more open about what we don't know, and sort of leaning in. I should say, sorry, the
Yeah.
tool you mentioned actually is called Carbon Log. It is like Cloud Code specific. It's a plugin. It estimates your emissions from actually coding at like the command line, which is pretty neat. It's pretty, take a look. The interesting part about it is like on any individual user's basis, it's like quite small, but it's an aggregating. It would be like the equivalent of like if each of us ran the dishwasher one more time a day, like times hundreds and hundreds of millions of people, which is actually quite a lot of emissions.
Yeah. Right before we go to our very last questions, I posted a few things in the chat. We do this webinar pretty much every single Thursday at 2 p.m. Next week, we're interviewing the sustainability lead at Lyft. Michaela Byfield, who was wonderful. The week after, we're doing a demo of just how climate models work, kind of an educational hour. That is always very, very popular. The week after that is the state of sustainability reporting with a consulting firm called Labrador. And then lastly, if anybody is subject to Australian regulations, we're bringing in somebody from Australia who's waking up very, 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 very early to do a webinar with us about, or maybe staying up late, I don't know, to do a webinar about what's going on in Australia. And the last thing I posted, Steve, you mentioned Trellis. Next Wednesday, June 3rd, I think at noon Eastern time, I'm doing a pitch publicly along with, I think, 4 other adaptation startups. We're all kind of talking about our businesses. You all get to vote, and then one of us gets to pitch the main stage. So if you want to learn more about adaptation startups and come vote for Beehive, so we get a nice free ticket somewhere, come do that on June 3rd. To ask the final question from each one of you, offices have been through a journey. There was a period of time before I formally entered sustainability where I heard about offsets as the savior of our environment. Later, I kind of started describing them as the gateway drug to sustainability. Later, they had, like any true epic, the big come down. Now, perhaps they're finding their voice again. If you were to continue that trend forward, maybe Steve then Annie, but what does good look like? What does success look like for the carbon offsets industry? Kind of one thing that you'd want to see over the next 4 years.
Just one thing. That's not
One
fair.
thing is it more projects, better projects, more transparency, more people doing it, fewer people doing it, but bigger. Like, what do you think would be the
I
thing for
think
you?
we need scale. I think, like, in one word, I think there's a lot of work under the hood that has to get there, like, which is like consistent quality, or at least being able to find consistent quality, like simplified buying experience. But the goal here is to drive impact around the world on, like, available climate solutions that are not getting funded, and, like, whatever we're at now, let's 10x it, let's 100x it. I think, like, that's how we drive the impact that will move the needle.
Awesome, Annie. Annie, on mute. You did so well going on and off mute until the very end.
There we go. There we go. Okay. I mean, yes, I would say that. And I would say that we are on kind of the upward, but I'm still disappointed at how it's still taking a back seat and still kind of as it's still considered an inferior tool. And I want that to change, the narrative to change. At least it is in the outdoor industry, and I'm guessing in other industries as well, that it's just like there's the tools that you want to use, direct value chain reduction, and then the inferior tool that if you have to for a little bit, fine, do the offsets. Like that should change. It's not an inferior tool. It is one tool of many tools to address this situation. And so I think that just needs to happen in order for the market to, in tandem with the market becoming, an easier, more sophisticated, well-run sort of thing so that people jump on board and we have the growth that we want to see.
I like it. That's beautiful. And Sean throw in, which is another great idea of voluntary carbon markets become mandatory carbon markets. Steve would
Amen.
be happy. We know that. All
Agreed.
right. Steve, Annie, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Hope to see you on another week and appreciate everybody. Talk soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Idra.